Just because I made my adoptive brother unhappy, my sister and my wife sent me into the deep woods of the Appalachians to be taught a lesson. Before she left, my wife discreetly slipped the villagers a thick stack of cash. Leaning close enough that only they could hear, she whispered a few quiet instructions. Whatever she said, it was enough to make every pair of eyes in the village light up with cruel excitement. From that day on, I was no longer treated as a human being. I became their favorite target. Whenever they were bored, they beat me. Whenever they were angry, they took it out on me. I was nothing more than a toy to entertain them, the lowest piece of trash they could trample without consequence. The slightest attempt to resist only made things worse. The whips came down harder. The fists landed heavier. The humiliation became even more unbearable. Every single day blurred into another nightmare until I eventually stopped counting the months. Then one afternoon, the flimsy wooden door of my shack flew open with a loud bang. The village head stormed inside. Thinking she had come for another round of torment, my body reacted before my mind could. My trembling fingers instinctively reached for my only tattered jacket, peeling it off without a word. To my surprise, she barked, "Put your clothes back on. Mrs. Sterling is here to take you home." Home. The words sounded strangely unfamiliar. My hands froze. Slowly, I wrapped the ragged jacket back around my body, my thoughts blank. Do I still have a home to return to? Before I could even process what was happening, a sharp, crushing pain shot through the bridge of my foot. Crunch. The village head had deliberately stepped on it. She leaned closer, her foul breath washing over my face as spit sprayed from her lips. "You'd better remember what to say, and more importantly, what not to say," she hissed. "If you dare breathe a word about what happened here, we'll make sure everyone finds out exactly what you've been through." Her eyes narrowed into slits. By then, a pampered rich boy like you won't have a shred of dignity left. I lowered my head without saying a word. She actually believed Sienna would care? If Sienna had cared even a little, she never would have thrown me into this living hell. She never would have left me here for over a year without once asking whether I was dead or alive. Clutching my torn clothes tighter around my thin frame, I caught the unmistakable greed flickering across the village head's face. During the past year, I had seen these people for who they truly were. Cruel, heartless, bought with enough money. As long as I could escape this place, I swore I would stay as far away from Sienna and Basil as possible. For the rest of my life, I never wanted to see either of them again. The village head shoved me forward. Shielding my eyes from the harsh daylight, I slowly stepped out of the low mud hut. The sunlight was blinding. After spending so long trapped in darkness, even the warmth of the sun hurt my eyes. Not far away, a black luxury SUV sat parked at the edge of the village. Sienna stood beside it, dressed as elegantly as ever. Her perfectly styled hair barely moved in the mountain breeze, and her expensive coat looked painfully out of place against the rundown village. The moment her eyes landed on my ragged clothes, her brows knitted together in disgust. "What exactly are you trying to prove, Silas?" she asked coldly. "Dressing like a homeless beggar. Are you hoping I'll feel sorry for you?" For a brief moment before coming here, she had felt the slightest trace of guilt. After all, she had left me in these mountains for over a year. But Basil had warned her beforehand. He told her I would probably put on a miserable act to win her sympathy. Looking at me now, she became convinced he had been right. I wasn't even wearing shoes. In her eyes, every torn piece of clothing and every bruise on my body was nothing more than a carefully staged performance. The tiny flicker of guilt she had carried vanished instantly, replaced by cold contempt. She thought I was using the cheapest trick possible to manipulate her. The moment she spoke, my body moved on instinct. Long-term abuse had carved fear into my bones. Without thinking, I lowered my head and raised my hand. Slap. "I'm sorry." Slap. "I was wrong." Slap. "I shouldn't have done that." Again. And again. I struck myself harder each time, showing my own face no mercy. The crisp sound echoed through the quiet village. Sienna froze. Her eyes widened as she instinctively reached out to stop me. Only then did she notice how quickly my cheek had swollen. A thin stream of blood trickled from the corner of my mouth, staining my cracked lips. For the first time, hesitation flashed across her face. The village head's expression changed as well. She hurried over, grabbing my wrist while pretending to be concerned. "Mr. Silas, what are you doing?" she exclaimed loudly. "Why would you hurt yourself like this?" Hidden from Sienna's view, she shot me a vicious glare. It was a silent warning. One wrong word, and I would pay for it. My entire body began trembling uncontrollably. Sienna withdrew her hand. The brief concern in her eyes disappeared almost as quickly as it had appeared. Enough, she said impatiently, waving a dismissive hand. Get in the car and stop making a scene. As though simply looking at me dirted her eyes. I lowered my head and silently climbed into the SUV. The soft leather seats felt foreign beneath my scarred skin. The cabin carried the faint scent of expensive perfume and polished wood. It clashed painfully with the sour smell of sweat, damp earth, and dried blood that clung stubbornly to my body. Sienna never looked at me again. She simply instructed the driver to leave. The vehicle rolled down the uneven mountain road in complete silence. Only after several minutes did she finally speak. I wasn't planning on forgiving you this soon, she said in the tone of someone granting charity to a beggar. But Basil has a soft heart. He begged me to bring you back. Her voice grew colder. You'd better remember that. If you ever disrespect him again, don't blame me for being merciless. My throat tightened painfully. Countless explanations rose to my lips. None of them came out. I was too tired, too broken, too exhausted to keep proving my innocence. From the very beginning, this marriage had never been built on love. Sienna had been drugged during a party, and by a twist of cruel fate, she had ended up spending the night with me. She loved Basil. I knew that better than anyone. That was why I had never wanted this marriage in the first place. But the Sterling family's elders refused to accept Basil simply because he had grown up in an orphanage. To them, his background alone was enough to make him unworthy of standing beside Sienna. The Sterling family seized on that single incident to force the marriage. In the eyes of the outside world, it was a respectable union between two influential families. To Sienna, however, she had simply been sold to me. Back then, I had been hopelessly in love with her. I had loved her ever since we were teenagers, quietly carrying those feelings through the years. When the wedding was arranged, I foolishly believed fate had finally smiled on me. I couldn't have been more wrong. That marriage wasn't the beginning of my happiness. It was the first step into hell. All it took was one complaint from Basil, one tear, one unhappy expression. Without asking a single question, Sienna and my own sister abandoned me in those desolate mountains, leaving me to endure more than a year of living torment. The memories made my chest ache. Lowering my eyes to hide the bitterness threatening to spill out, I spoke softly. Mrs. Sterling, I won't speak carelessly to Basil anymore. My voice was barely above a whisper. I won't make either of you unhappy again. After a brief pause, I gathered the last bit of courage I had left. If possible, once we get home, could we get a divorce? Sienna shot me a cold, irritated look. Enough. Her voice was sharp enough to cut. What's with the sarcastic act now? She folded her arms and sneered. As if you'd ever willingly walk away from the Sterling family's fortune. Her eyes filled with undisguised contempt. Or is this another one of your tricks? Trying to make Basil look like the villain again? You really are disgusting. My heart sank. No. I shook my head desperately. I mean it. I truly do. I don't want anything anymore. Before I could say another word, a violent cramp twisted through my lower abdomen. The pain came so suddenly that it stole my breath. I instinctively wrapped both arms around my stomach, my entire body trembling. Cold sweat rolled down my forehead. Sienna glanced at me before letting out an impatient scoff. That act was believable the first time. She looked away. Now it's just annoying. My lips turned pale. I bit down hard enough to taste blood. Can we stop the car? I whispered. No answer. Please. My breathing grew uneven. Just pull over for a minute. Sienna simply closed her eyes, treating me as though I didn't exist. Another wave of agony crashed through my body. This time, I couldn't hold it anymore. Warm liquid spread down my legs. A humiliating warmth soaked through my thin pants as an unpleasant smell slowly filled the luxurious cabin. Time seemed to freeze. I buried my face in my trembling hands, wishing the earth would open up and swallow me whole. Whatever dignity I had once possessed, the villagers had stripped it away long ago. They had beaten me, broken me, reduced me to someone who no longer even had control over his own body. The smell finally reached Sienna. Her face twisted with disgust. Without warning, the pointed heel of her shoe slammed into my side. Pain exploded through my ribs. Silas. Her voice dripped with revulsion. You're absolutely filthy. You couldn't even control yourself like a normal person? I curled tighter into myself. The hatred burning in her eyes was identical to the hatred I had seen every day in that mountain village. But somehow, it hurt infinitely more coming from the woman I had once loved. "I'm sorry." My voice shook. "I'm sorry." I repeated the words over and over, like an instinct I could no longer suppress. Sienna opened her mouth to continue berating me. Before she could, the driver hesitantly spoke. "Ma'am." He glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "I think we should head home as quickly as possible. Mr. Silas doesn't look well." Only then did Sienna notice where she had kicked me. A dark stain was slowly spreading across the fabric of my pants. Blood. Fresh blood seeped through the thin cloth. Her expression stiffened. For the rest of the drive, neither of us spoke another word. Silence filled the car. Heavy. Oppressive. When the SUV finally pulled into the driveway of the Sterling Villa, the driver hurried to open the door. Inside the living room, Basil was lounging comfortably on the sofa with a game controller in his hands. Laughter echoed from the television. The moment he saw me, he immediately paused the game. His cheerful smile disappeared, as though someone had flipped a switch. Dropping the controller onto the couch, he hurried behind Sienna and nervously grabbed the sleeve of her coat. "Sienna?" His voice trembled. "Silas is back." He peeked at me cautiously. He's not angry with me, is he? I never wanted to stay here while he was gone." His eyes quickly reddened with tears. "Please don't let him yell at me." Anyone who didn't know the truth would think he was the one who had suffered. Sienna immediately wrapped an arm around his shoulders. Her expression softened with unmistakable tenderness. "It's all right." She gently rubbed his back. "You don't need to be afraid. He doesn't have the courage to lay a finger on you anymore." Then she turned toward me. Every trace of warmth vanished from her face. Her gaze became as cold as sharpened blades. "Silas, you'd better remember your place. This house isn't yours to control. If you dare bully Basil again..." She stared at me without blinking. "I'll make you regret ever setting foot back here." A hollow laugh escaped my lips. Bully him? I had never harmed Basil. Not once. Ever since childhood, he had been an expert at pretending to be the victim. A scratch he gave himself. A tear shed at the perfect moment. A trembling voice. Every accusation against me had earned him sympathy, while pushing me deeper into everyone's hatred. I used to defend myself. Now, I no longer had the strength. Ignoring the sharp pain spreading through my body, I slowly lowered myself onto my knees. My forehead nearly touched the floor. "I'm sorry." My voice was empty. Everything before was my fault. I shouldn't have wanted things that were never meant to belong to me. Sienna's expression remained icy. "Stop pretending to be pitiful." Without hesitation, she kicked me squarely in the chest. The impact sent me crashing backward. My back slammed against the polished marble floor. For a split second, darkness swallowed my vision. I couldn't breathe. "Sienna?" Basil clung tightly to her arm, shrinking back as though I were some terrifying beast. "He's scaring me." His frightened whisper echoed through the room. I lay motionless on the floor, while the accusations continued raining down on me from above. Every insult, every look of disgust, every word. I accepted them all without resistance. Somewhere along the way, the endless abuse had worn away every trace of pride I once possessed. Sometimes, I even wondered whether this suffering was punishment from heaven for sins I couldn't remember committing. Sienna looked at me as though I were a piece of garbage littering her spotless home. "Take him to the basement." She waved her hand dismissively. "I don't want to see him." Two bodyguards immediately stepped forward. One grabbed each of my arms. Without a shred of mercy, they dragged me across the floor. Every bump sent fresh agony through my battered body. The basement door creaked open. Cold, damp air rushed out to meet us. They tossed me onto the hard concrete floor as though throwing away a broken object. Pain exploded through every bone in my body. Unable to move, I slowly curled into the darkest corner of the room. My eyelids grew heavier. My consciousness drifted further and further away. In the darkness, the basement gradually disappeared. Instead, I found myself back in that isolated mountain village. Twisted faces surrounded me once more. Their cruel laughter echoed endlessly in my ears. Rough hands reached toward me from every direction. Their mocking voices blended into one horrifying nightmare that refused to end. I let out a weak groan. The sound disappeared into the empty basement. No one came. No one heard me. And no one cared. I don't know how long I had been unconscious. The first thing that pulled me back was pain. A sharp, burning sting ripped across my back, so sudden and brutal that my eyes flew open. For a moment, the world was nothing but darkness and ringing ears. Then my vision cleared enough to make out a figure standing over me. Basil. He was holding a leather belt. The belt was darkened with old blood, the cracked leather stiff from years of use. He let it dangle loosely from his hand, a twisted smile spreading across his face. "Silas," he said almost cheerfully, "you used to be so proud, so untouchable. How did you end up becoming such a pathetic dog?" His eyes gleamed with pure malice. My body reacted before my mind could. I curled tighter against the cold basement floor, arms wrapping around my head. "Why?" My voice came out hoarse and weak. "I always treated you well growing up." Basil laughed. Then the belt came down. Crack. Fire exploded across my shoulders. Crack. Another strike tore into my side. Again. And again. The force behind each lash was vicious, enough to make my vision flicker black at the edges. "Your existence is the problem," Basil hissed. "You were born into the right family, and you got everything I ever wanted." His face twisted with a hatred so deep it barely looked human. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Ever since Basil had been adopted, the White family had treated him like royalty. The best clothes, the best food, the best schools, every wish granted before he even had to ask. They poured everything into him, as if they were trying to make up for the life he had missed. And me? I was the one left behind, the one ignored, the one sacrificed whenever a choice had to be made. Yet somehow, even that had never been enough for him. The belt tore through my skin again. Pain surged through my body so violently that my thoughts began to drift. The basement blurred around me, the damp walls melting into shadows. Through the haze, I saw another figure appear in the doorway. Beatrice. My sister. For a split second, I thought she looked shocked. Then she spoke. "Basil, what are you doing?" Her tone was calm, almost detached. "I only came down here to check on him. This wasn't my idea." Basil lowered the belt slightly, but Beatrice didn't rush toward me. She didn't ask if I was hurt. Instead, she looked at me the way someone might look at a filthy pile of garbage. "It's fine," she said coldly. "Someone like him needs a beating once in a while. Maybe it'll finally teach him his lesson." Not a single trace of concern crossed her face. It was as if I weren't her brother at all. I lay there on the icy concrete, too weak to speak. The cold seeped through my torn clothes and sank deep into my bones, deeper than any wound. When I woke up again, I was staring at a white ceiling. The smell of antiseptic filled the air. A hospital. Beatrice stood beside my bed with her arms crossed. Her expression was as cold as, "I know Basil was the one who hit you," she said flatly. "Keep your mouth shut about it." She glanced at me with open disdain. "You owe him enough already. Honestly, you probably deserved it." I stared at the ceiling for a long moment before answering. "What exactly do I owe him?" Beatrice frowned as if the question itself annoyed her. "You bullied him when you were kids. You stole Sienna from him. Isn't that enough?" I felt exhausted just hearing the same accusations again. Since childhood, every one of Basil's tears had become evidence against me. If he fell, I had pushed him. If a toy broke, I had ruined it. If he failed a test, I had distracted him. And Sienna? I had been a victim of that night too. But none of that mattered. I closed my eyes and said nothing. In their minds, every explanation I gave was just another lie designed to manipulate them. I was done. Truly, completely done. After Beatrice left, a doctor entered the room holding my chart. His expression was unusually grim. "Where is your family?" he asked. "I need to discuss your condition." I opened my eyes. "I don't have a family," I said quietly. "It's just me. You can tell me directly." The doctor hesitated. Then he pulled up a chair. "Your internal organs have suffered severe trauma," he said carefully. "Several have shifted from their normal position, and your kidneys have been damaged the most. They're beginning to fail." I tried to smile, but my face barely moved. During the endless fevers in those mountains, something had happened to the nerves in my face. Part of it no longer obeyed me. "So what happens now?" I asked. The doctor looked down at the chart before answering. "If you receive perfect care and avoid any further stress or injury, you might have 6 months." He paused. "If things continue the way they have been," his voice softened, "you may only have 2 weeks." The room fell silent. Oddly enough, I didn't feel fear. A strange sense of peace settled over me instead. I had known for a long time that my body was falling apart. Every breath had felt heavier than the last. Every day had felt like I was dragging around an empty shell. Now, at least there was an end. And for the first time in years, that thought didn't hurt. Silas did not cry. He simply thanked the doctor in a voice so faint it barely disturbed the quiet of the hospital room. When the doctor left, Silas looked down at his trembling, scarred hands. 6 months if he stayed clear of them. 2 weeks if he stayed in that house. The choice wasn't a choice at all. It was a final eviction notice from life. An hour later, Sienna stormed into the room, the sharp click of her designer heels cutting through the sterile silence. Beatrice followed closely behind. Neither brought flowers. Neither asked how he felt. "Get up, Silas," Sienna commanded, tossing a fresh set of clothes onto the foot of the bed. "The media is asking questions about why you were hospitalized the moment you returned. You're coming back to the villa today. We have a family dinner with the elders tonight, and you will act perfectly fine." Silas didn't move. He kept his gaze fixed on the blank television screen on the wall. "I'm not going back." Sienna scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "Are you throwing another tantrum? Basil is still traumatized because you scared him in the basement, and yet he's the one who insisted we come get you. Stop being so incredibly selfish." "I want a divorce, Sienna," Silas said softly. The words lacked the desperation of his plea in the car. They were heavy, cold, and absolute. "I don't want a single penny of the sterling fortune. I just want my freedom. Sign the papers, and I will vanish from your lives forever." Beatrice stepped forward, her face twisted in anger. "Silas, stop acting like a victim. You think you can just walk away and make our family look bad? You owe Basil and you owe Sienna. You will come home, and you will play your part." Silas slowly turned his head toward his sister. The partial paralysis of his face gave him a strange, unreadable expression. One eye wide and hollow, the other completely dead. "I have 6 months left to live," he said, his voice flat. "My kidneys are failing. If I go back to that house, the doctor says I'll be dead in 2 weeks. Is that the lesson you wanted to teach me, Beatrice? Is that enough to pay my debt?" A suffocating silence descended upon the room. Sienna's breath hitched, her hand freezing midair. Beatrice's aggressive posture melted into sudden uncertainty. For a fraction of a second, a primal fear flashed in Sienna's eyes, not of losing Silas, but of the sudden, chilling realization that the boy who used to beg for her love was completely gone. But then, the skepticism returned. Sienna forced a harsh laugh. 6 months? A terminal illness? Silas, do you take us for fools? Did you bribe a doctor just to stage this pathetic drama? Silas didn't argue. He reached over, pulled the medical chart from the bedside table, and tossed it weakly onto the blanket. "Believe what you want. I am signing myself out. Don't look for me. The next time you hear my name, it will be from a coroner." Without waiting for their response, Silas dragged his frail body out of the bed. He ignored their shocked stares, changed into the clothes they brought, and walked out of the hospital into the pouring rain, leaving the 2 women standing in the center of the room, holding a medical report they were too terrified to read. Silas used the last bit of money in his personal, untouched bank account to rent a tiny, secluded apartment on the outskirts of the city. It was small, damp, and lacked any luxury, but to him, it was a palace. There were no whips, no leather belts, no cold marble floors, and no Basil. For the first 3 weeks, Silas did nothing but sleep and watch the rain fall against the window pane. His body was an empire of constant pain, but his mind was finally at peace. He began buying fresh ingredients, cooking simple meals, and even adopted a stray, battered street cat that looked just as broken as he did. He named the cat Liberty. Meanwhile, back at the Sterling Villa, a strange unease began to fester. Silas had truly vanished. He hadn't called, hadn't asked for money, and hadn't shown up at any family functions. At first, Basil tried to maintain his usual act. One evening during dinner, Basil accidentally dropped a porcelain bowl, shattering it across the floor. "Oh no!" Basil whimpered, immediately shrinking back and covering his face. "Please don't let Silas beat me. He's going to be so angry." Sienna, who was cutting her steak, stopped. She looked at the empty chair across from her where Silas used to sit, enduring insults in silence. "Basil," Sienna said, her voice unusually quiet. "Silas isn't here. He hasn't been here for a month." Basil froze, his tears drying instantly. "Right? I forgot," he muttered, a hint of annoyance slipping into his tone before he quickly masked it with a fragile smile. For the first time, Sienna felt a cold prickle of discomfort. The script was running, but the villain was missing, making the performance look bizarrely hollow. 2 months passed. Silas's health was visibly deteriorating. He walked with a heavy limp, his skin had turned a translucent gray, and he frequently coughed up blood. Yet, he spent his remaining energy doing things he loved as a boy, sketching in a small notebook and sitting in a nearby park, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. One afternoon, Beatrice was driving through the lower-income district for a business meeting when she spotted a familiar, thin figure sitting on a park bench. It was Silas. She pulled her car over and stormed into the park, determined to berate him for embarrassing the family by living in a slum. "Silas, what is the meaning of this? Look at you, you look like a corpse. Are you still trying to ruin our reputation?" Silas slowly looked up. The sun hit his face, revealing the deep, dark purple shadows under his eyes and the stark, gaunt hollowness of his cheeks. He didn't flinch, nor did he look angry. He looked at his sister with absolute indifference. "Hello, Beatrice," he said softly. Beatrice's breath caught in her throat. Close up, she could see the erratic, shallow rise and fall of his chest. He looked fragile enough to shatter from a strong breeze. You really look sick," she whispered, a sudden, suffocating panic rising in her chest. "That medical report, it wasn't a lie? Why would I lie to gain the pity of people who threw me to monsters?" Silas replied, a faint, sad smile touching the unparalyzed side of his mouth. "Go back to Basil, Beatrice. He needs you more than I do." "Silas, come home," Beatrice pleaded, her voice cracking as an overwhelming wave of sisterly guilt, suppressed for years, finally broke through. "We can get you the best doctors. I'll talk to Sienna. We can fix this." Silas stood up, using the back of the bench for support. "You can't fix a shattered glass, Beatrice. You can only cut yourself trying to pick up the pieces. Let me die in peace." He turned and walked away, leaving Beatrice standing alone in the park, weeping as the realization of what she had done finally crashed down upon her. Beatrice drove straight to the Sterling villa, bursting through the doors in a state of hysteria. She confronted Sienna, demanding they look into the medical files and, more importantly, investigate what actually happened to Silas in the Appalachians. Sienna, shaken by Beatrice's breakdown, finally hired a private investigator to look into the village where Silas had been sent. 2 days later, a thick manila folder was dropped onto her desk. As Sienna flipped through the pages, her face drained of color. The report contained photos of the mud hut Silas was kept in, interviews with the villagers, and bank records. The villagers confessed everything. They admitted they were paid a massive sum of money to torture Silas daily. But the most horrifying revelation was the source of the money. It wasn't Sienna's bank account. The thick stack of cash slipped to the villagers had been tracked back to a secret account belonging to Basil. Furthermore, the investigator found old security footage from the White family estate from their childhood. It showed Basil intentionally breaking his own toys, throwing himself down the stairs, and cutting his own arms, all while Silas was in entirely different rooms. Basil had engineered every single lie from day one. Just as Sienna slammed the file shut, the door opened and Basil walked in, holding a tray of tea. "Sienna, you look stressed. I brought you some." Sienna leaped from her chair, striking Basil across the face with such force that the tray clattered to the floor, shattering the porcelain. "You monster!" Sienna screamed, her voice shaking with rage and agonizing regret. "He loved you. He gave up everything for you. And you destroyed him." Basil clutched his burning cheek, his eyes widening in terror as he saw the open investigation file on the desk. The victim facade completely vanished, replaced by an ugly, desperate sneer. "So what if I did? He had the White family name. He had your love. He deserved to be crushed." The final month arrived. Silas could no longer leave his bed. The local hospital had provided him with palliative care equipment, and a kind neighbor checked in on him daily. Silas spent his days petting Liberty, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the clock to run out. One evening, a frantic pounding echoed at his door. The neighbor opened it,